To Chidi Wano, security expert and consultant, who joins us virtually from the capital of the United Kingdom, London. Good morning to you, Chidi. Thank you so much for your time, as always, today.
Morning. Thank you for having me.
Quite a lot is happening on several fronts. Russia is making advances in Luhansk and Donetsk in spite of the determined opposition of the Ukrainians. The Turks are preventing the Finns and the Swedes from joining NATO. And then you have, on the other hand, President Erdogan asking the Ukrainians and the Russians to keep discussion channels open. The EU, meanwhile, is considering a sixth package of sanctions, but Hungary and Italy are standing in the way because of what they perceive will be the very harmful effect of such sanctions, which should include an oil and gas embargo against Russia to their economies. Let's unpack them one by one. Let's start with the Turks' opposition to the Swedes and the Finns joining NATO. It seems, though, that there is something to that. The others were looking at it as a bargaining chip, but Mr. Erdogan is digging in.
Yeah, so I mean, Turkey has always acted as the spoiler, or as the kind of the naughty baby of NATO. So they will. It's expected that Turkey will come up will try and exploit this to the best of their advantage. Now, the complaints about the Scandinavian countries having PKK or Kurdish elements there is not new. This is something that they've raised quite a few times in the past, but this is the first time they've actually had any form of leverage in order to get what they want. So it's expected that Erdogan will make the most of this and will try and exploit as much as he can this situation to get some concessions. Now, the Scandinavians are very unlikely to completely expel them, but there will have to be some movement towards meeting the Turks halfway. So it might be closing down offices, expelling certain people, or putting limitations on certain activities. But both sides will meet somewhere in the middle. It will most likely be more in Turkey's favor because they have a stronger hand. NATO can't afford for this to drag on. They can't afford for there to be a massive public spat. So there'll be a lot of interventions from different points of view. I mean, even if you speak to the Turks themselves, this stipulation seems to have come directly from Erdogan himself, rather than it being a formulated policy with the foreign ministry and all of the organs of government. So it is very much likely that Erdogan is using this as part of his personal kind of foreign policy agenda. And when you put into account kind of Turkey's offers and overtures towards the Mariupol siege, how they were trying to insert themselves into that situation, and also their status as the custodians of the Black Sea. You see that Turkey is very important for Turkey to continue this line of making sure every party in this conflict is somehow, the word I'll say is kind of somewhat dependent on them, or they have leverage over every party, because at the end of the day, they will then emerge as a kingmakers, and then they'll be able to extract concessions from every other party. So the Turkish question is very interesting and very important, but I don't expect it to be a significant impediment to the ascension of Sweden and Finland.
Let's come to the EU itself and the next package of sanctions, which they're supposed to be meeting about today. Last week and in the week before, Hungary was seen to be the main opposition to the really big elephant in the room for those sixth round of sanctions, which is the oil and gas embargo on Russia. But they've since been joined by Italy in that corner. And their main grouse is that this will severely impact on their economies, not to talk about make it very uncomfortable for their people, both in terms of rise in household expenditure and all of that. Yet, you require some level of unanimity for this to happen and for it to be effective. How do you think the EU is going to play this? Because it's getting tough now.
Yeah, so this is where diplomacy is going to have to come in at its finest, because this is a very difficult problem set. So there is a genuine problem of high household bills. I myself living here, my bills have gone up, two or three times. It is a serious issue. And for those countries further to the east, that are very much more dependent on Russian gas, Russian oil, it is a serious problem. Now, unless there's going to be some sort of a EU-wide subsidy of energy imports, everybody's going to see an increase in their costs. Whatever substitutes for Russian gas and oil is going to be more expensive in the short term and in the medium term. In the long term, it will most likely balance itself out, but there will be a lot of short-term pain. And, for countries, particularly democracies, who rely on voter satisfaction, this is a problem. There is also the issue that Hungary in particular, it's an awkward child. Orbán is quite close to Putin beforehand. So this is his way of hedging his bets, making sure that he still has, his road into Putin, but at the same time still remains within the EU fold. Italy is a slightly more complicated problem set. Again, there's a lot of economic issues, but their industry, particularly in the north, depends very much on Russian gas. So taking that away without anything to substitute increases Italy's, almost perennial economic problems. But also, it increases their internal political problems, because there is a north-south dynamic in Italy, and the northern industrialists, hold a lot of power. Giving them problems at this particular time when, Italy has just about got a stable government presents a lot of internal problems. So taking this into consideration, the EU has to look at every country and understand that they're factoring in, every country has to factor in, these massive economic costs as well as their internal costs. Here in the UK, the cost of living crisis has been in the headlines for quite a while. Now, it's considered to be, something that the government is dealing with. They've just announced, a massive tax on energy industries that they're going to try and pass down to consumers. But not every country has the wherewithal to do that. So it's a genuine problem. I think the final point I'll make on this is how Russia has created this problem. So long before the invasion, energy prices were rising steadily. Now, this was considered to be subject of many multiple factors, but it can be seen now, looking back in hindsight, that Russia clearly tried to create this condition of making sure that energy was scarce, which increased the price, and also gave them more funds, and then also prepared the ground so that European economies have already spent money trying to balance out these rising costs in the preceding months, and now are kind of at the end of their tether. So it's been a clever play by them as well.
I was going to come to that, and I'm happy that you already set the scene for it. In the United Kingdom, which has been, according to the Russians, for example, the most vociferous critic of Vladimir Putin, this energy crisis are coming from the twin problems that were already on ground when you had Brexit and the fallout of Brexit, and then you had the COVID-19 pandemic, and now you have this energy crisis in the UK. How is it playing out, particularly because it does appear as if that is going almost side by side with what some have described as what would have been a political crisis, except for the war in Ukraine, and which would have possibly created problems for Boris Johnson's government? How is all of this playing out, particularly with the people, in terms of what you described, your personal experience? Your prices in terms of energy consumption have gone up 2-3 times already, and we're only talking of a few months. So, and I can imagine that would probably have cascaded down the line.
So the UK is actually in a fairly unique position in terms of its energy consumption. So one thing that I didn't mention previously was that in terms of diversity of supply, the UK has North Sea oil. We can get oil from Norway, from our own North Sea fields, from the Norwegian North Sea fields. So we're not that dependent on Russian gas. It makes a very small fraction of our production. We also still have nuclear power plants. I don't think we've got coal anymore, but we have a fairly diverse energy supply. So the main issue in the UK is the world energy markets. The fact that prices are high globally. We can't, because of all the different rules, the WTO rules, etc. We can't arbitrarily just say, okay, we're buying our own gas at cost price. We have to buy it at the global price. So as long as it's high globally, we are going to be spending that same amount of money. But what we are not subject to is the fear that the Russians can arbitrarily cut off our supply. So again, that's what maybe I didn't mention it previously, is that is another factor, is that the Russians can just arbitrarily at any point, as they did to Finland, as they've done to Ukraine, as they did in 2014 to Slovakia and Czech Republic, just turn off the gas. And at that point, you're unable to do anything. You've got to play the game. So here in the UK, we're insulated against that, but we're not insulated against the price rises. Now, domestically, that has had a massive effect on the government. The government is currently mad in a lot of really ridiculous and petty scandals, Partygate, where, complaints about the government's holding many parties. I mean, they seem to really enjoy their parties, but that took place during the lockdown. Now, under normal circumstances, this would be a big scandal, but, the war in Ukraine kind of detracts from that. On the domestic scale as well, you've got to factor in that there isn't much in terms of an alternative. Whilst there is a credible or much more credible opposition party right now in the UK, nobody really wants the instability of a general election. So this, taken as a whole, for countries like Britain, this insulates us very much from the geopolitical or political fallout. But countries in Europe itself are much more vulnerable. And these are the warm months in Europe. Once we get up to October, November, December, where we get to the cold months, that's where the problems come in. So what you're seeing now is the preparation for that stage. Italy and Hungary have renewed their contracts with Russia. That's their fallback. If in the interim, they're able to get alternative sources of energy, then they'll most likely switch to that. But it is a big issue, and there has to be a European-wide solution. And almost inevitably, what it means is Germany is going to spend some money.
Indeed, hideously complicated, Chidi. Thank you so much for your time. And happy to know that you won't be suffering the vagaries of the weather during this time, even if the war in Ukraine does continue. For that, I'm quite happy. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
After the break, Serbia announces 3-year gas deal with Moscow for natural gas supply. Please stay on with us.